to episode 22, I think, of the Hilo Stitch podcast. I'm your host, Kristen, and I'm here to talk to you about what else? Knitting. I will also be talking about knitting pattern design, other goings-on in the fiber arts community, and you may hear me mention Diego Luna at some point for absolutely no reason. So thank you so much for joining me today. A special thank you to my Patreon patrons who help keep this podcast up and running, and a special welcome to anyone who is checking out the podcast for the first time. So if you don't know me already, my name is Kristen Janik. I'm a knitting pattern designer and instructor, mom to 2 little boys, and wife to a very tall man from Peru. We live in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C., and I enjoy yoga, Orioles baseball, vegetable gardening, wine, but it's mostly about the knitting, so let's get started. All right, I want to get into our usual kind of Chatterbox segment where I ramble a little bit about life in general, but with the world the way it is, I feel like I need to make a few statements first to kind of frame the podcast, and those are as follows. Black Lives Matter. Policing in this country is racist. Christopher Columbus was a horrible person. Systemic racism and white privilege are both real. Donald Trump is a horrible, horrible human being and a disgrace to the presidency. And science is real, and you need to wear a goddamn mask if you go outside. So if you disagree with any of that, this is probably not the podcast for you, and I would invite you to move along. However, if all of those things are right in your wheelhouse, then I think we'll get along fine, and we can continue with the show. So, the world is a raging dumpster fire. There is still a pandemic. Maryland is starting to reopen. Messed up my knitting here. It seems like no matter how I pick the project up out of the bag, it's always wrong, and I've got the yarn tangled in it. Anyway, so Maryland is in, I believe, phase 2 of reopening. My county is still in phase 1 because we are a suburb of Washington, D.C., so we are in a different position than, say, some of the more rural counties out in Western Maryland, and some of the more rural counties out in Eastern Maryland. I know that sounds odd because Maryland is a really tiny place, and I'm talking about it like it's huge. In reality, it is about 6 hours, border to border, but it encompasses a lot of different landscapes. So out in the west are the mountains, and it is more rural, and then over on the east obviously is the coast, and there's also some rural lands on the other side of Chesapeake Bay, but here kind of in the middle we have Baltimore, Annapolis, and Washington, D.C. obviously are more urban. So things are a bit of a patchwork around Maryland, which frankly doesn't make any sense to me because viruses don't respect county lines, but it is what it is. So we have started reopening a little bit, and I believe outdoor dining is now allowed at our restaurants. My sister and my father live in Frederick County, which is just a little bit north and west of here, and they are actually going to be opening indoor dining this weekend, which seems like a terrible idea. But I know that because this weekend will also be the anniversary of my mom's passing, so I'm going to get together with them, and we have made a reservation for an outdoor table. We all have our masks and are ready to finally get out of the house a little bit, taking all of those precautions that are necessary. School is finally over. Today is the last day. My oldest son does have what is going to be called a breakfast bunch on Monday, which is a Zoom meeting at 8:30 in the morning, kind of eat lunch together with his classmates and say goodbye. And then around lunchtime, I'm supposed to drive him by the school to wave at his teacher. And I guess they have, like a little goodie bag or something for them. But School is done. I have been homeschooling for 12 weeks. That is enough. I don't ever want to do it again. I don't know what schools are going to be like in the fall. Of course, nobody does. I really hope. I don't want them to do anything unsafe, but at the same time, I don't know that I can handle any more homeschooling, especially since the kids are going to be home all summer with no summer camps open. And at this point, the pool is also not open. We do have a neighborhood pool that is not open. I asked my family, I'm wondering if the pools, I'm not sold on taking the kids to the pool anyway, but I am curious if the pools are going to be open in Frederick County. My sister lives in a relatively small community with a pool, and if that were open, maybe we would later in the summer take a chance. So it is what it is. Make sure you're wearing your mask, washing your hands, staying out of large groups. If you are doing activities, do them outdoors. And let's try to avoid a second wave, which already frankly seems to be coming, because people just couldn't not go to Applebee's or whatever, and they had to get out of their houses. We also have a lot of unrest in the country right now, rightly so, because policing nationwide keeps murdering unarmed Black people, and we're not doing anything about it, despite the fact that it keeps happening over and over and over again. So, of course, there have been protests around the country. The closest to me, obviously, is Washington, D.C. I have been to protest in D.C. before. I have been to a protest in Lafayette Park. Those were always very peaceful. I took my kids to those protests. I would not take them to the protests that are happening now, not because of the protesters, but because of the way that police forces have been responding. I want to say shocked, but not, that the president is trying to use the military to supplement domestic policing and terrorizing peaceful protesters. Not only have I been to a protest in Lafayette Park before, I used to eat lunch there in good weather, probably a couple times a week. It was a couple blocks from my office. It is right across Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House. And that area has always been open. And I worked in DC during both George W. Bush and Barack Obama. And it was never closed off. And since the very beginning of Trump's administration, more and more fencing, more and more restrictions have been put in place around the White House that were not there at any time in the past. And of course, this last week, he basically put up nearly 2 miles of fencing, not just around the White House, around the park, up to 17th, 16th, whatever that street is there. I think I would know this. 18th, 17th, 16th Street, and then all the way over to 15th Street, all the way around what is called the Ellipse, which is on the back side of the White House, all the way around the park that is in back of the Ellipse, all the way down to Constitution Avenue. This is absurd. First of all, this is public space. Needless to say, I have been appalled at the way that this administration has responded to protest, appalled at the way they haven't addressed any of the actual issues that people are protesting. And I am just waiting and waiting and waiting until I can vote. Biden was not my first choice. I would vote for a rock before voting for Donald Trump to be president again. But what's really important here is the anti-racism work that I'm very happy to see is gaining ground. Some laws are being passed to address issues of police brutality. They, of course, do not go far enough, but I'm somewhat hopeful to see steps in the right direction. And the discussions of anti-racism and inclusion and diversity and things that we have been discussing for the last several years in the fiber arts community are now being discussed more broadly in lots of different communities. And I think that is a good thing. I don't know that it's going to get us anywhere, but again, I am at the very least hopeful that we are taking a step in the right direction. So I would encourage you, people have been sharing lots and lots of resources. There's a lot of information available if you're not sure where to start. Lots of wonderful books have been mentioned, lots of activists that you can follow. So I hope that you will start, if you have not already, educating yourself and be able to contribute with your own anti-racism work. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some fundraising that I'm doing later in the podcast to support some activist organizations. That's all the sort of random chatter I have for you this time, of course, because mostly we're just sitting at home doing nothing. But knitting, there is knitting. So let's go ahead and start talking about that a little bit. Pattern drop. In this episode, I actually have 2 new patterns for you. One has already been published as I'm recording this. The other one hasn't been published as of this moment, but by the time you're watching this, it will have been published. So the first is the Ticket to Anywhere shawl, which I showed you in the last episode of the podcast, and I will just pop a couple of pictures in here. So this shawl was specifically designed for mini skeins. You can use other arrangements of yarn, but it was specifically designed to work with mini skeins. I know a lot of people have kind of been hoarding mini skeins as of late for various kinds of projects. And so here's another one for you. What you need for this one is 6 minis that will fade into each other. So in my project, I've used neutrals. They're kind of grays and browns. Doesn't have to be that way, but they should be 6 that will blend into each other. And then 4 contrasting minis. So your minis don't have to contrast with all of the colors. The way that it works is that you will transition from one sort of background mini to the next, and your contrast color in that section should contrast with both of those colors. But then, maybe later in the shawl, your contrast color is going to be completely different. Just depends on what kind of gradient you're using. You can also do this shawl with, I don't know about 2 colors, definitely 3 colors. You could also use one background color and then minis for your contrast colors, or vice versa. What you need is 600 yards of what I would call your background color, which in this case is that gradient minis, and then 400 yards more or less of your contrast colors. And this pattern is, I want to say, adventurous, beginner, and beyond. There's no brioche or complicated lace. There's some basic cables, slip stitch patterns, some very simple feather and fan lace. But beyond that, it is not very complicated. You do have to know how to read charts. Again, they're simple charts, but you will know, or have to be willing to learn to read them. They are used in, how many sections are here? I want to say there are 7 sections, and there are charts for 3 of them. So Ticket to Anywhere is available in my Ravelry shop, and you can find a link to my shop in the box down below the podcast episode here on YouTube. And you will also find a link in the show notes. Speaking of which, I never posted the show notes for the previous episode. I'm really getting sick of doing the show notes. I need to think about that. Are the show notes valuable? Do people actually look at them? I don't know. I mean, every once in a while, I will use the show notes from a podcast I've listened to or watched, but really hardly ever. So that is something to think about. So first pattern drop is the Ticket to Anywhere shawl, perfect for your mini skeins, or just 3 or more colors of fingering weight yarn. And this is a nice big wrap. It's about 1,000 yards overall. But the good news is that the stitch patterns keep changing, so you aren't going to get bored. And then I have another pattern that, as I said, as of this moment hasn't been published, but will be published by the time you're watching the episode. So this is a sock pattern. This is sort of a riff on my witchcraft hat that I published in the fall, which used the Fiber Seed Sprout DK. And so this pattern is called Simply Taboo. And this uses the sprout fingering weight to do a similar kind of geometric slip stitch pattern. As you can see, I'm only holding one sock. I have only finished one sock. This is not new. What I am doing for the second sock is to reverse the colors. So instead of carrying the solid over the variegated, I'm going to carry the variegated over the solid. I think you can still appreciate the pattern without both finished socks. So this is a slip stitch pattern. So this is no fancy color work or anything like that. These are just slip stitches that make this sort of diamond pattern over the sock with solid colored toe, heel, and cuff. The pattern is worked from the toe up. This is a eye partridge Blackman gusset heel. Just a normal cuff. The pattern includes 6 sizes. So I believe it's 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9, 9, no, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9, 9.5, and 10, I believe are the sizes that I've included in this pattern. So again, this sock pattern is called Simply Taboo. It is worked in the fiber seed, fingering weight. I don't know if it's called sprout fingering, or I'll write it down in the show notes. I may or may not remember to post. This variegated color is a new colorway for her called Andromeda. And then when I saw it, I thought would be beautiful to make sort of this take on the witchcraft hat, the slip stitch pattern hat. And these skeins are huge. They've got like 500 yards a piece. So if you buy 2, any 2 of her skeins, but hopefully this really pretty new yarn, you will definitely be able to make more than 1 pair of socks from your 2 skeins, unless you are making, even if you're making the absolute largest size, I think you will have plenty of yardage. This is a nice sturdy sock yarn. I believe it is 100% superwash merino. I will double check, but it is nice and tightly plied, so it's really sturdy. I used a US 1.5 needle, which is my go-to for socks. I am a bit of a tight knitter, so you may need to go on up to a 2 for you. You'll just have to swatch, of course, and check your gauge. So Simply Taboo, this is available right now in my Ravelry shop. And since it is the first week, that means there's an introductory coupon code over there. When you click on the pattern page, you will find that discount code there. You can check that out. So 2 new patterns for you so far in June, and I will have 1 more at the very end of the month. Since I've been talking about the 3 new patterns that I'm launching this month, I wanted to get into a little bit of news and notes. The first bit of news is that the Ticket to Anywhere shawl was my 100th pattern published. That's a lot of patterns. My original goal was to get that done in 2019, so I didn't quite make it, but I'm not too far behind here in 2020. So in honor of having published 100 patterns, I am going to be doing some kind of celebratory giveaway. I'm really struggling for some ideas. No, I cannot afford to give away $100 worth of patterns, as nice as I know that would be. For a small-time designer like myself, that would be quite a lot. So I'm still playing with that idea, but if you have an idea, I would love to hear it. Go ahead and comment down below. How can we celebrate 100 patterns from Maybe a Better One in Designs? I would love to hear your ideas. And secondly, for news and notes, is that since I am publishing 3 new patterns this month, I am also doing a fundraiser in relation to those. So the 3 new patterns are the Ticket to Anywhere shawl, the Simply Taboo socks, and then at the end of the month, the Painted on the Sky sleeveless top. And what I'm going to be doing is that $2 from the sale of each of those patterns this month is going to be going to one of 3 organizations that are working for racial justice. So that is Black Lives Matter. There are some concerns about their sort of nationwide funds, that the transparency and what the money is being spent on isn't great. So I am going to be donating to the local chapter of Black Lives Matter in Washington, D.C. The Baltimore Action Legal Team, which is going to be providing bail money and legal services for protesters in Baltimore. And then Campaign Zero, which is an activist organization working toward ending police brutality against the Black community. So every one of those 3 patterns that I sell this month, $2 from the sale is going to be put into a big sort of pot, and at the end of the month, I'll divide the money between those 3 organizations. So that's a great way to support some organizations that are doing good work and get yourself some nice new patterns. At least I think so. So that is the news and notes for this month. 100 patterns. Please help me figure out how to celebrate that, and fundraisers to support racial justice work. For on and off the needles in this episode, I have some ponderings, some thoughts. I don't have anything off the needles, and I don't actually have anything new on the needles yet either. So last episode I had talked about starting one of the projects for my Make 9 2020, which was the Lionheart shawl, and I showed off the amount of progress I had made, which was very little. And then I expressed my disappointment that significant parts of the shawl are actually color worked flat. So what I said in the last episode was that I thought I would go ahead and give sort of the smaller of the 2 color work sections a try and see how it worked out, and then make a decision. But what I have decided actually is that I'm not going to do that. I already know how miserable it is to work color work flat. I know it's going to drive me crazy. So you know what, what I've decided is that I'm going to go ahead and scrap this project and pick something else to make in its place. I don't know what exactly. Maybe another shawl. There are plenty in my queue, or something else. But I know that. I mean, you can see it's been several weeks. I have made no progress on that. I don't want to do the color work flat. I don't even like color work in the round, to be honest. I don't dislike it, but it's not my favorite. Just having to sit with the chart, and then it's not important. But rather than let this languish and then feel bad that I haven't worked on it, I'm just gonna go ahead and call it now. and maybe replace this with something else that is in my queue for my Make 9 2020. Now I know that this designer, Gabrielle something French I can't pronounce, has like a Lionheart, I don't know if it's called Lionheart sweater or Lionheart pullover or something with this design. Gabrielle Vezina, or however you pronounce that in French. Has a colorwork pullover with this design. Obviously it's a pullover, so it's knit in the round. So maybe I'll look into that someday. We'll see, but I'm just not gonna torture myself with this. As much as I like the shawl, I know it's never gonna get done. So technically that's gonna be something off the needles because I'm gonna pull it off the needles and rip it out. I don't know if that really counts. As far as things that I've had on the needles, I have made some progress with my Ripple butt shorts. So I have done the waistband, which I know doesn't seem all that impressive, but it's actually more work than it seems because it is a double layer with the drawstring inside. So I've done the drawstring. I did the, you can see that it's stocking out on one side and ribbing on the other, so it's double layered. Then you pull out a professional cast on and knit the two layers together with the drawstring in between. That actually was much easier than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be really fiddly trying to get the drawstring to stay in between the two layers while you work them together, but it was actually very cooperative. So this is done, the waistband that is. It looks a little small. It's hard to tell because the needle is a little small, and this is very stretchy, and it is supposed to have some negative ease. So when I look at it this way, it doesn't look terribly small. I am a little concerned though. So this is using a DK weight yarn. The gauge called for in the pattern was 16 stitches to the inch in a 3x3 rib on a US 6. And I knew I was not 16 stitches to the inch. 4 stitches to the inch, 16 stitches over 4 inches. On a US 6, I knew that I would not, again, that's too, if I was going to get that few stitches per inch, I would need to go up. So I'm using a US 7. And ribbing is very stretchy. So I'm less concerned about the body of the butt shorts than the waistband, which again looks a little small, but it is very stretchy and it is supposed to have some negative ease, so we'll see. So have made a little bit of progress, and I think that's sort of the fiddliest, most complicated part of the project. You know, you're starting with a provisional cast on, working these 2 different stitch patterns and then sealing it all up together. And now it is going to be sort of, I know there are some short rows involved to make space for your butt in the shorts. Probably don't really need that. I have a disappointingly small backside. So I probably don't need a whole lot of extra room since it's already ribbed and stretchy, but we'll see. So for now, it's just working in the rib with the short rows and until you divide for the legs. So I am really happy with this project so far. I love the way that this yarn is working up. This is, again, La Bien-Aimée Merino DK, and the colorway is called Grello. I love it. So this is a really cute project that I am enjoying so far. If they turn out to not fit, I'm really not going to enjoy it so much, but so far so good. And I am planning, since today was the last day of homeschooling, I am planning to, after I finish recording, to go outside. It is pretty nice weather today for June. It's not super hot and it's not humid, and just enjoy and spend some time working on my butt shorts as a relaxing, selfish project. So those are the two projects that I actually have on the needles, selfish projects, non-design projects that aren't sitting in an UFO bin. But I did wind up yarn for a project. We have been, of course, talking how important it is to elevate Black voices in our community, to support their work, to share their work so others are able to find it, because all of the algorithms that govern our social media are biased, just like human beings are. So one of the podcasters that I love is the Drunk Knitter. She's hilarious, and she just had a baby. That is not just had a baby. Recently had a baby. Is the cutest thing. It's so adorable, and she has a great podcast on YouTube. I will definitely put a link to her in the show notes, and if I can figure out how to do one of those card thingies, I'll put that in here. I did it once. I think I could do it again. But she is also a designer, and so I cued this design of hers a while back. This is this adorable sort of cropped, almost a bralette, like a full coverage bralette. This is called Aria, and it's been in my queue for a while. I've had 2 babies. I don't know that crop tops are really for me, but it is just so darling. So in thinking about making more time for some selfish knitting, but not quite being ready to work on some of the sweater projects that are in my Make 9 because it's June and just doesn't seem right. I was going through my queue, looking at some smaller projects that I might have a hope of finishing, and I saw this, and I did some stash diving and found 2 skeins of yarn that I think are going to work very interestingly. So this is from Plied Yarn Company, which is a collaboration between Karita Collins of Neighborhood Fiber Company and Ann Weaver, who is a designer, both of whom are in Baltimore. I got this at, I think Rhinebeck, or at India Untangled at Rhinebeck last year. I actually got this colorway, which is called Cotties, and the other colorway is called Nevermore, which are Baltimore themed, which obviously I love. This isn't normally maybe my color, but I really like this sort of, hand spun look of this yarn. And I grabbed it, not really knowing what I would do with it. And then I found another similar skein of this hand spun style yarn. And this is from Fully Spun. So she's I Am Fully Spun on Instagram. And you can see that the orange from here matches that sort of center colorway. And now I've lost the sun, so maybe you can't tell so well. All right, now we're getting the sun back, so let's try that again. So you can see sort of the orange here coordinates with that orange that's in the middle of this. And this is sort of a, again, another hand spun style yarn, but this one gradiates from color to color. And as you can see, this also has sort of a gradient at the top and bottom. So my idea is to use this at the hem and collar, and then it'll fade right into that orange that's worked there at the center. This colorway is called I-95. I don't know exactly where Fully Spun is located. I got this at the Frederick Fiber Festival. I don't think she is Maryland based, but she must be somewhere sort of in the mid-Atlantic area, I would guess, because Frederick Fiber Festival is relatively small and it's mostly regional dyers. Not that it matters, but I-95 is just a cute colorway name. So that is my idea. I'm a little concerned. This is very soft. It's not itchy, but it's not as soft as maybe you would like here in this region, and I was going to use it for the collar. So I don't know. I may just end up using it at the hem. and just use this for the whole rest. We'll see how it works out. I think that's going to be a fun selfish project, and really loving these two yarns. They're definitely not my usual colors, but you know, it's important to branch out occasionally. So that is hopefully a selfish project that I am going to be starting soon. And I'll include links to all of that in the show notes, should I remember to publish them. Adelante, what is coming up from Medio Peruana Designs? So we've already talked about, I'll have 3 patterns being published in June. And then I'm probably not going to publish anything in July because 3 in June is quite a lot. And by the time I am publishing again, it is going to be time for starting projects for the fall, which I know seems crazy, but if you don't start your fall sweaters in the summer, you're not going to have them to wear when the weather actually gets cold, unless you are a very fast knitter, which I am not. Oh, there's the cat. So one of the things I am working on is the updated version of the Jaji pullover, which was originally written for men in 5 or 6 sizes, and I'm expanding it to be unisex in 10 sizes, with some variations between sort of a men's styling and a women's styling, the men's styling being more oversized, and the women's styling being not so oversized and a little bit more cropped. So I've started working on a new sample, which will obviously have women's styling. So I haven't gotten very far. I did decide for my sample to go ahead and use a tubular cast on, just because tubular cast-ons just look really nice. And if that is not something that is super important to you, you can absolutely use a regular cast-on. But I just think it looks so much nicer, and I've gotten pretty good at it after a few years, so why not? I don't find it any more difficult at this point, or at least not much more difficult than a regular long tail cast-on. So I decided to use a tubular cast-on, but it is not strictly necessary. And then I just started working on the patterning. So the yarn I'm using for this is Blue Sky Fibers Woolstock worsted. Colorway is called, sort of lilac, but it's more sort of like a heathered rose color. I would not call it lilac, but you can see it's just sort of a grayish, gray toned pink / purple, and this is a drop shoulder sweater, so this is worked from the bottom up. And at this point I've set up the patterning. There are a couple of cable columns. These are just simple little slip stitch cables, and there is a center panel on the front of the sweater, which is a mistake rib. And then the rest is stockinette. So now that I've established the patterning, I can just go and knit on this very straightforward until it is about 14 inches long. And then so for a drop shoulder, you basically just are working in the round, and then you just stop working in the round and start working the back and the front flat. There's no sort of armhole shaping. You might bind off a stitch or 2 under the arm, but other than that, there's no armhole shaping. And then the sort of most complicated part of the project is going to come after you've started working flat for your armholes. There's going to be some kind of neck shaping, and in this case, it's sort of a little placket at the front neck, and kind of like this actually. So there's a little placket at the front that has buttons, and a rounded neckline, and it's relatively simple. And of course, I've already done it once because I knit the original sample. So fortunately, as I said, there are some cable columns and some mistake rib, but once you have gotten going, this is a very easy project to sort of memorize what you're doing, as long as you've got your stitch markers in place, and you can just keep going. So this is going to be an easy project for me to just pick up and put down and knit throughout the summer. I don't know when I'm going to re-release the pattern because I do want the sample done first. So possibly if I knit really quickly, maybe in July. We'll see. I don't have any definite plans for that one, but that is one project that is in the works, even though it's not a new pattern. I actually have started on a new pattern though, and this is something that is going to be published, I believe, my target is August. I'll have to double check. So I think I had showed you the original swatch for this project that I had just done in some knit picks. But now I've started swatching for the actual sweater with the actual yarn. So this is Biche et Bouche something fingering weight. It probably has a name. The Petite Lamb's Wool. There we go. The Petite Lamb's Wool. And this is going to be a pullover. So this is not, as you can see, it's very small. This is not a swatch for gauge. This was just a swatch I did to, try to remember how I did the original cables. You can see that I kind of played with some variations in here because I couldn't remember exactly how I did them the last time, and I didn't write it down. And also just to see if I was going to like the fabric on this size needles or if I wanted to go up and down. So I did not use this to check my gauge. This was just to see if I like the fabric. And I didn't make it a full size because if I didn't like the fabric, because I wanted to wash and block it before just to see if I liked the fabric once it was washed and blocked. And if I didn't want to use too much yarn, especially because this is worked in the round, so I'm swatching flat in the round, which wastes a little bit of yarn here. I am pretty happy with this fabric. I think it's going to be a little bit tighter when I'm actually working in the round. Just because even though this is a good approximation of working in the round, it's not 100% accurate. At least in my case, I have found it is very, very close, but I'm still working on a small needle back and forth, trying to carry the working yarn behind, keeping it loose, but not too loose because I don't want to waste the yarn. So actually working in the round, I found for me is usually a teensy bit tighter than doing the swatch this way. But I am pretty happy with the fabric. This is a fingering weight, but since it's cabled, I do want it to be relatively loose so that it also has some nice drape, especially because this is a not a super soft, silky yarn. This is lamb's wool, so it's not itchy, but you can see a little bit, it's pretty, it's got a lot of fuzz to it. It sticks together a lot, so it's maybe is not going to naturally have quite as much drape as something that is very tightly plied and in a very soft yarn like merino. So it is just a little bit more rustic, and in combination with the cables, I want to use that larger needle size to make sure it's still going to have some drape. And I think this is looking pretty good. What I don't want is for it to be, like see-through, but I think we're good. I mean, you can, that's definitely going to be the, so you can, I can look through it, but it is definitely covering, covering things up. So, I have started on this project. I have not made it very far. In keeping with changes I have made to my designs, this is going to be available in 10 sizes. You will want probably 4 to 6 inches of positive ease with this sweater. Like I said, I want it to be kind of drapey. And this is also going to be a drop shoulder. This is worked on a US 5. So, again, I am a tight knitter. You may even be able to go up to a 6. But I think US 5 is pretty reasonable for a fingering weight yarn. I know none of us really want to knit a whole sweater on a US 2 or 3. I think 5 is okay. So, in case you weren't sure what a 5 looks like. So I'm just getting started on this. I have started doing a little bit of math. Like I said, this is not a super accurate gauge, but based roughly on this. I've started doing some of the math, and then once I get some numbers going, I will do a formal gauge swatch and get started on the sample. So again, I believe I've got that on track for August. I hope. Now that the kids are done with school, will I have more time to knit? Probably not, because they're not going to camp and the pool is closed, but you know, we'll see. We'll do our best. Again, that's a project that once I get going, since it's a drop shoulder, since it's a relatively straightforward stitch pattern, I won't need to sit there with the pattern, follow a chart and things like that. And that does make things a little bit easier. The other thing that I am kind of pondering is that I bought these 2 skeins of yarn a while back. In the spring, I think. We had a relatively warm day and the entire world hadn't shut down yet, so we spent the day in Old Town Alexandria, and I stopped by Fiber Space. Maybe it was the fall. Maybe it was like a nice day in the fall. Anyway, and I grabbed these 2. So this one is Brooklyn Tweed Shelter. I just love this really deep, I believe the color is Almanac, just this very deep navy blue. And this one is Spin Cycle Yarns Dream State. So it's not the fingering weight one. It's the supposedly worsted but more like DK weight one. And again, Spin Cycle is one of the yarn companies that does sort of these hand spun style yarns. So this one is, as you can see, sort of browns and creams. And I personally just love brown and blue together. I don't know why, but I always have. So I bought these thinking I was gonna make some kind of shawl, some kind of worsted weight shawl, good for the fall. I haven't really gotten much further than that. I just like the idea of making a shawl with these. Something that's not overly complicated, not lace, some kind of color pattern, but again, not color worked flat. So I don't know, but I wound them up to start playing with them. And we'll see what happens. I do have 1 more skein of each. So I think it's like 130 and this is 150. So somewhere close, somewhere around between 500 and 600 yards. And I'm ready to start playing with them. Hopefully they'll become a shawl. I don't know for sure, but I like the idea of them being a shawl. So I do have that on my sort of projected designs for the year. It basically just says 2 color worsted weight shawl. But it is something that is hopefully coming up. And that is what I have for Adelante in this episode. I have made some very, very minimal progress on my dye garden. So I'm gonna pop a few clips in here so you can see a little bit of the progress I am making. I warn you, it is not much though. All right, so this is the future site of my dye garden. This is on the side of our house. There used to be azalea bushes here. We had them pulled out this spring, but 2 things. The guy didn't pull out all the roots, so I'm digging some of those up. And also new things have started to grow here already, including these thorny, spiky, whatever these are. So today I am just doing a little bit of work to start cleaning it up. I do have some little babies sprouting. Oliver, get out of the street. I do have some little baby plants, dye plants sprouting. They're not ready to go in the ground yet, but hopefully soon. So I'm spending some time digging today because it rained last night, which means digging out the roots is a bit easier. But as you can see, our soil is very clay-y, so it's almost impossible to dig when it's dry. And it's really terrible for plants, so this is going to be a big project. All right, so I'm having very little luck with these little peat pots that I'm trying to use to start my dye garden seedlings. So yesterday I did move the Tango Cosmos to a planter. Honey, yes, go ahead, thank you. Here's my little garden helper. Gonna water some plants for me. I ate it. Anyway, so I did move the Tango Cosmos to a planter. And now what I'm going to do is take some of these that have started a little bit. So this is Hollyhock. This is Black Knight Scabiosa. And these I don't think are labeled. They're either Dyer's Chamomile or Dyer's Coreopsis, I think. And I'm going to put them in these old planters. I ate the strawberry. But I'm going to put them in these old sort of cheap planters that I had lying around from when I bought mums in the fall, and then they died. I have a couple of these little bitty guys in larger planters that hopefully will help them to grow bigger so I can actually put them in a garden, although of course my garden has made very little progress. So. All right, that is all I have for you in this episode. So thank you so much for joining me for episode 22 of Hilo and Stitch. You can find links to everything that I talked about in the show notes if I remember to publish them at mediaperuana.com/Hilo and Stitch. A special thank you to my Patreon patrons who are helping to keep this podcast and Media Peruana Designs business up and running. If you would like to find more information about how you can support the podcast and get special perks like early access to new episodes and free patterns and pattern discounts and all of that good stuff, you can find more information at patreon.com/mediaperuana. Old and new episodes of the Hilo and Stitch podcast are found here on my YouTube channel, as well as Knitting Design Studio, my sort of behind the scenes vlog series about pattern design more in depth. I have just started a new series showcasing the design process for Painted on the Sky, my sleeveless top design that's going to be published later in June. You can also find all of my free knitting tutorials here on the YouTube channels. Lots of good stuff here. If you enjoyed the podcast or the tutorials or the vlogs, I hope you will subscribe, share, like, comment, all of that good stuff that will help increase the reach of the channel. If you are looking for me on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Ravelry as Media Peruana, and I will see you next time.